Aston Martin got its start in 1913 as Bamford and Martin, selling Singer cars. By 1915, Lionel Martin was building racing specials for the Aston Hill Climb as Aston Martin Specials, something that would be stopped as both Bamford and Martin were involved with the military during the First World War. But race production would get more serious after the war, and Bamford would leave the company in 1920. They would build cars for the French Grand Prix and Brooklands and set numerous records, using a twin-cam 4. But they were bankrupt by 1925, and the company was sold to Lady Dorothea Charnwood, who changed the name of the company to Aston Martin. Augustus Bertelli would become both the designer and technical director, introducing a new line of overhead cam 4-cylinder engines, with the first of the new designs called the First Series, followed closely by the International Series, and then the Le Mans in 1932. They had an aluminum body, 4-wheel drum brakes, and dual carburetors, offered as a 102-inch wheelbase 2-seater or an 120-inch wheelbase 4-seater, with a 70-horsepower 1.5-liter reaching 85 miles an hour, and prices starting at £650. But prices would soon drop to under £600 in an effort to boost sales, with a total of 130 being made. They would evolve into the Mark II in 1934, which would be the basis for the Ulster race car, increasing horsepower to 85 and top speed to 100 miles an hour. For 1936, they would change their focus to the road-going models to contend with ongoing financial issues and frequent changes in ownership, introducing new updated models and increasing the size of the engine to 2 liters. But production would stop in 1939 as they retooled to build aircraft parts for the war. After the war, Aston Martin would be taken over by David Brown Limited, a gear manufacturer founded in 1880 that had moved to full transmissions and tractors in the mid-1930s, followed shortly thereafter by tanks. The 2-liter was reintroduced in 1948 and would later be referred to as the DB1 for David Brown II. But David Brown also purchased Lagonda, primarily for its engine. Lagonda was founded in 1906 by an American opera singer turned British national and engineer, naming the company for the place of his birth. Starting with motorcycles and then moving to cars in 1913, initially with an 1100cc 4 that would continue to evolve over the next decade. In 1925, they expanded into sporty models with an overhead cam 2-liter Hemi 4 that was joined by a 2.4-liter 6 the next year, with supercharged versions arriving by 1930. But by 1933, they were purchasing engines from Crosley and Meadows, and by 1935 going into receivership and getting new owners, who brought in Walter Owen Bentley to develop new engines. This included a 4.4-liter V12, and later the engine in question, a dual overhead cam 2.6-liter straight 6, an engine that would not only power the post-war Lagonda, but would also make its way into the Aston Martin DB2. Introduced in 1950, it was 163 inches long on a 99-inch wheelbase and 2,600 pounds. It was rated at 105 horsepower and would do 105 miles an hour. More than 400 would be made. In 1953, it became the DB24, being stretched to 170 inches long and gaining a back seat, and horsepower would be up to 125. A bigger 140 horsepower 2.9-liter became available the next year, and sales would eventually climb over 750. It would evolve into the Mark III for 1957, that had updated styling and was 2 inches longer, and the 2.9-liter 6 was offered in 162 to 178 horsepower versions. It would be sold alongside the new DB4 that arrived the next year, a bigger car at 177 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase and 2,900 pounds, powered by a bigger dual overhead cam 3.7-liter with 240 horsepower, making it a mid-15-second car capable of more than 140 miles an hour, and it was soon joined by a more powerful GT version. Production would see a record high, eventually reaching over 1,200. Well, the Lagonda was coming to an end, with the 3-liter of 1958 being the final car for the brand, although the name would return in 1961 as the Lagonda Rapid, essentially a 4-door DB4. It was 196 inches long on a 114-inch wheelbase and 3,800 pounds. 55 were produced by 1964. The DB5 arrived in 1963, 180 inches long on a 98-inch wheelbase, and moving up to a 4-liter, initially with 282 horsepower. Now a mid-14-second car, able to exceed 145 miles an hour, eventually gaining fame as the James Bond car. Sales would be just over 1,000. The styling of the DB6 for 1965 was meant to improve aerodynamics and reduce lift. It also moved to a bigger 102-inch wheelbase, and sales would nearly reach 1,800. The DBS, introduced in 1967, was bigger, 180 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase, and it weighed 3,500 pounds. And in 1969 would gain a new 5.3-liter 327 V8 with 375 horsepower, putting it in the mid-13s with a top speed over 155 miles an hour. It was known as the DBS V8 until the 6 was dropped, and for 1972 it was simply the Aston Martin V8. But by this point, Aston Martin was in financial trouble and sold off again. The V8 got updated styling, and an attempt was made to expand the line with a new Aston Martin Lagonda sedan introduced in 1974. It was 194 inches long on a 115-inch wheelbase and 4,400 pounds. But it did little to help the company's financial woes, as they were forced to pull out of the U.S. due to not meeting new emissions regulations. Then there would be factory shutdowns, and the company would be sold again in 1975. There was a new Lagonda for 1976, but deliveries were delayed until 1979, while production was being updated through 1978, and the V8 became the V8 Vantage Coupe and the V8 Volante convertible. But the company would continue to change hands, seeing few changes in the cars through the early 1980s. The Lagonda would be discontinued in 1985, and for 1986 a limited run of Zagato were made, attempting to add more modern style. Then Ford stepped in and took a controlling interest in 1987, and updated the styling on the standard model for 1989 as the Virage. And starting in 1992, it would become available with a 6.3-liter V8 with 465 horsepower, making for a 13-second quarter mile and speeds around 180 miles an hour. With the DB7 of 1994, Aston would move in a new direction, sharing development and architecture with Jaguar. The car was 183 inches long on a 102-inch wheelbase and weighed 4,000 pounds, initially using a 3.2-liter supercharged straight 6 for 335 horsepower, for a mid-13-second quarter mile and speeds over 155 miles an hour. Soon, a 5.9-liter V12 would be added, increasing output to 414 horsepower, putting it back in the low 13s, with a top speed of 185 miles an hour. 7,000 would be built over 10 years. There was a new model added for 2001 as the Vanquish, 184 inches long on a 106-inch wheelbase, and using a 460 horsepower version of the V12. And for 2004, the DB7 was replaced by a bigger DB9, 185 inches long on a 108-inch wheelbase. A smaller two-seat Vantage sports car was added for 2005, only 173 inches long on a 102-inch wheelbase, using a 380 horsepower 4.3-liter V8. In 2007, Ford would sell the majority of their stake in Aston Martin to private investment firms, and the Vanquish would be replaced by a new DBS. There would be a limited edition 177, a name that indicated only 77 were made. A car that was 183 inches long on a 110-inch wheelbase and powered by a 750 horsepower V12, potentially capable of 220 miles an hour. For 2010, a four-door model returned to the line as the Rapid, a car that was 198 inches long on a 118-inch wheelbase and weighed more than 4,300 pounds, initially with a 470 horsepower version of the 5.9-liter V12. In 2011, Aston Martin began selling their own version of the Toyota Scion IQ city car as the Signet, primarily in an effort to comply with European fleet average regulations for mileage and emissions, at the same time creating a line of limited production Zagato performance models. And soon Aston Martin would try to expand the Lagonda sedan sub-brand with a limited production tariff. There would be 10 DB-10s made, developed specifically for the James Bond film Spectre, but by this point the company was bleeding money and without funds for new development. So an agreement was made with Mercedes to provide engines in exchange for a 5% stake in the company, leading to the DB11, 187 inches long and 110-inch wheelbase, and 3,900 to 4,100 pounds, initially with a 5.2-liter twin-turbo V12 with 600 horsepower, making it a 200-mile-an-hour car, soon gaining a more affordable twin-turbo 4-liter V8 version with only 503 horsepower. And they would begin working on ways to appeal more to women, which included starting to collaborate with companies in other industries, leading to Aston Martin branded speedboats, a submersible, a bicycle, luxury apparel, and even condominiums. And the company would do a complete turnaround to profitability in just a couple of years. In 2020, they introduced the DBX SUV, which quickly became one of their best-selling models ever. And after controversies around electric car regulations, Aston Martin has signed an agreement to get electric powertrains from Lucid Motors. The company is once again seeing losses, but still doesn't seem to be having trouble finding new investors. So it may continue producing limited production performance cars for some time to come. So as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below and like and subscribe.